On today's podcast, we talk web design for music sites, Clop and Pop and Death Star conclude our series in music and culture, and we talk with Vic Corey from Boston band Local Midnight about their first live album. We'll play a track. Let's get to it. Welcome everybody to episode 3. Sorry we're a bit late with this one, but between learning half of Leon Chi's material, production work on the soundtrack album, we had the very talented Sonny Larson in earlier today recording fiddle parts, and unfortunate and rather expensive plumbing adventures, we've been a tad distracted. On a personal note, I gotta say I'm really excited about this Greenwood Ren Fair gig. About once a day I could get my voice down low enough to sing tenor parts, which means we get to do Queen of Elfland's Daughter. It's an old Phoenix tune, and I've got to tell you that is fun shit to play on Zook. I'm really excited about it. Geek Music News is next. Heather Dale and Ben Deschamps of the Heather Dale Band have worked with a local Toronto game company to produce an online text adventure game called Gates of Camelot. That's in open beta now. It's at www.gatesofcamelot.com. Vixie and Tony are playing the Wayward Cafe June 22nd, that's in Seattle. Bright Primate have released the Nomoria original soundtrack, that's at jamesprimate.tk. Leon Chi will be at the Greenwood Ren Fair, I was just talking about that. I'll be there too, doing my best Alexander James Adams impersonation with them for 6 shows, June 29th and 30th, Richland, Washington. Talking of, Tricky Pixie will be returning to Fairy Worlds for one of their small number of shows this year, that's Alec, S.J. Tucker, and Betsy Tinney, that's July 28th. Crime and the Forces of Evil, that's me, at Clallam Bay Comic-Con, that's July 14th and 15th. This is the only town where I will eat cooked fish in North America. I'm not kidding. Finally, Kirby Crackle's 4th album, Sounds Like You, drops July 9th. That should be a lot of fun. If you have anything for Geek Music News, please email us at crimeandtheforcesofevil.com, and we will put it in the very next episode. Local Midnight is a Boston area band centered around the extended MIT scene, doing kind of gothy folk. After 8 years, they finally put out an album. It's called Archives After Hours. Lead songwriter Vic Corey stopped by to tell us about it and play us a track. Tell us a little bit about Local Midnight.
Local Midnight was the name that we agreed on for this band some 4 or 5 years after we founded it. Before that, we had played under the names of Trillion Blonde and Oxytocin High, and we played one show as the Dead Opossums. That was the show that we played because I had a sinus infection, and I sort of felt like an opossum had climbed up my nose and died. And I made the mistake of announcing this on the air before we had agreed on a band name. We had this really wonderful vocalist. Part of the reason that I started this band was because I wanted to write music and have her sing it. But she was kind of a diva, and she never liked any of the names that we came up with for the band. She quit in a huff when the drummer wouldn't sleep with her. And then after that, suddenly everybody agreed on a band name, and that band name was Local Midnight. So Local Midnight has come to be the name for sort of that once and future project. When I have played it solo, when I play the music solo, because I write the music mostly by myself, not that you can tell because we do a lot of polyphony and madrigalian style singing together. Mm-hmm. But when I write the stuff myself and perform it by myself, that band is called 5 Minutes to Midnight. That's just me. But Local Midnight is everybody, where everybody means, whoever's handy. So if you end up looking at the Bandcamp page and end up flipping through the artists, it will always say Local Midnight, and be followed by some number of people, likely to include me. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 tracks I have that I don't personally appear on, but the number and names of the other people vary somewhat. I think I've even managed to spell all their names properly.
So this track we're going to play, I forgot the name of it.
It's called Know Nothing.
Right, Know Nothing.
So forgetting the name of the Know Nothing actually is completely appropriate. The name of the song is something you could totally not know.
It's a live performance. Can you tell us a little bit about that concert?
Yeah, we were at a Samhain party hosted by science fiction author and writing professor Sharian Lewitt. So we were surrounded by MIT professors and science fiction writers and MIT students. And Sharian is also very goth, so we were also surrounded by goths. And these are not necessarily people you would think would listen to the same music. But it turns out that if you walk into a room of these people and you just open your face up and sing, they will all listen to you. And they will all respond as though this were music, even if they don't think they like a cappella, even if they don't think they like Buddhist gospel, or whatever it is you want to pigeonhole this particular song into. I think in this particular recording, which was done directly in front of Joe Haldeman, you have some people talking in the background, and I've been trying really hard not to figure out what they're saying. Standing up there on stage with my bandmates, it was good enough that we were louder than they were.
So the title comes from a CVS error?
Yes, this was noticed by my life mate, Daniel Barkalow, who's one of the primary authors of Git, Git being a very popular repository and version control system today. And before Git, I think a lot of people, and myself included, primarily used CVS. CVS is one of those interfaces, or has one of those line-based interfaces where it's fairly easy for you to type in the wrong thing. And one of the things that you can type in wrong, which doesn't really bear repeating, causes CVS to respond, I know nothing about yesterday. I know nothing about today. And I think this struck Daniel as, kind of a philosophical statement for a piece of software. So he came to me at one point and said, you should really write a song about this. And I was like, that's really Zen. Knowing nothing about yesterday and knowing nothing about today. Whether or not I accurately reflect the religious sentiments of version control software, I have no comment upon.
Great.
Let the song roll.
Well, I met the Buddha on the road to nowhere, but I wasn't in a killing frame of mind. So I just smiled and left my options open. Maybe we will meet another time. I know nothing about yesterday. I know nothing about today. Even you don't know anything about tomorrow. Took me years to learn to love my own ignorance. What a man has not discovered, he has not destroyed. Let your questions be the best part of your learning. There will be infinity to enjoy. I know nothing about yesterday. I know nothing about today. Even you don't know anything about tomorrow. So forgive me most of all, 'cause I'm not innocent. Please forgive me just because I am alive. I met the Buddha on the road to nowhere. Somehow so far we have both survived. I know nothing about yesterday. I know nothing about today. Even you don't know anything about tomorrow. Nothing.
All of the album will be up on Bandcamp eventually. Do you have a timeline for that at all? And where will it be?
It's at localmidnight.bandcamp.com. And I'm hoping to have it up by local midnight Eastern times by the time the podcast airs.
Great. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for listening. And thanks to whoever listens to this for listening. And I hope you like the music.
Next up, we have the concluding segment on musical culture in North America and all the ways that musicians have to deal with it. This time it's Clop and Pop and Cosplay and MC3PO from Death Star. They're a lot of fun to listen to, so stick around. I think you'll enjoy this entire section. After that, the DIY short segment. Stay tuned. Are we running a little late for you?
I'm down.
Yeah, I'm down. I'm not.
I've got time. I mean, all you're doing is keeping me from going and getting soup. It's not really a big deal to me.
Your life is so glamorous.
You're such an old man.
I got my
I
soup
was gonna go.
and a
I
Coke.
was gonna go down to the corner tavern and get some soup. Hold on, it's gonna take me an hour to get down there, but I'm ambling.
Give me a Coke!
I'd like to order a canister of beer. Can you bring a church key? I left mine at home. Yeah, pop tops. Do they still serve hams here? Hams?
Whole hams!
Whole
Whole
hams. It's from the land of sky blue water.
In the jelly. I like them in the jelly.
They still have Strohs here in the short bottles. I like the short bottles. Get me a vitamin R.
Okay, so let's talk about let's talk about musical and non-musical culture.
Okay. I have recently toured Atlantic Canada as part of a tour of Eastern Canada, and that gave me some real exposures to what I now consider kind of my paradigm of musical cultures, which is to say a culture where people in general do music as opposed to where people in general consume music. Like, we live in a culture that is inundated with music. There's music everywhere. But very few people actually do it. If you were to compare it to, say, English classes, which go all the way through most of high school, or all of it, and on into college, it gives kind of everyone this background. They've been exposed to it, whether they pay any attention or not. They're still given all the basic tools are floating around them, and none of that kind of exists for music.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. In the U.S., for the most part, because music isn't a focus of primary and secondary education as part of a requirement, versus, say, some of the European education systems where it's right there with English and science and mathematics. It's just something that you take, and everybody learns how to play an instrument because it's important that you understand that. You have our culture where, in the Northwest, and especially in the greater Seattle area, there's a lot of musicians, but for the most part, still comparatively to the population as a whole, people are listening to music and they just hear what they like, and they don't really 100% know how to break it to pieces.
Well, one of the things I was talking about with regards to education and that lack of tools is the resulting lack of common tongue. In that, working with other musicians, I'm constantly running into the limitations of the language I know. I don't have any musical education either, but I'm trying to make music, and I'm recording other people's music, and we're trying to talk about ideas and stuff, and we're on all sides. We're reduced to waiting until the playback hits a point and then saying that thing. And that's kind of intensely frustrating.
That is interesting. This is actually something I think about a whole lot. There's a bass player named Victor Wooten who he's world renowned as pretty much the best bassist in the world. And someone asked him at a Q&A, when you're doing a solo, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about scales? Are you thinking about modes, which is kind of a weird version of a scale? And he said, the way I would put it is, what were you thinking about when you asked me that question? What am I thinking about when I'm answering it? And he just describes music as a language in and of itself, in that with musicians, at a certain point, you get to a level where the music itself is the communication, and that people can either, you understand as you listen to music, you're able to appreciate more different, varied, and complex types of music as you learn the language. You learn what it is you're listening to and are able to pick it apart. And the difficulty you're talking about is really just trying to speak the language of music using English. It's just a translation and with notation, a transliteration issue. But as far as the issue of non-musical cultures, I would go so far as to say I don't think there is such a thing as a non-musical culture. There's a really great musical philosopher named Harold Best, who's actually the dad of a friend of mine. But I mean, he's like a world-renowned published author and like a dean of a college and shit. And he talks about culture, art, and artifacts. And that culture is whatever the population of a given area whose culture you're trying to describe is. He does not draw any distinction whatsoever between high culture or low culture. People having a hootenanny on their back porch in Appalachia are as valid a culture as the Memphis blues scene.
Absolutely. I'm not arguing anything
classical
separate to that.
music. Right. And so he breaks it down into there are the cultures. All cultures have art that they do, art as the process, and the products of that are artifacts, things that artists in that culture make. And I don't think there ever has been or ever will be a culture from which artifacts are not created.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm thinking with the cultures closest we have, if you want to modify the language to a true non-musical cultures, I don't mean to imply that they are incapable of or something like that, but where it's actively oppressed, which was the case. I mean, in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, music was illegal. And that's not the only example.
Well, I mean, I think art, I don't think there really ever has been a culture where there was no art that was oppressed. I think it's just a matter of degrees, to be honest. Even in our age, I mean, whether it's actual fight the man protest art or whether or whether it's fringe hate speech art created by white power bands or
my art of masturbating on public bus has been infringed upon for an awfully long time.
You and half of Google
So it's really terrible because it's my calling from God.
Yeah. Like I get where you're both coming from. It's definitely something that we're not seeing, but the reception is where it affects it.
That's where I want to go.
Yeah, is music. Let's just go with music in general, not a specific kind of music or form of music. Because
totally, absolutely,
Quaff and Pop is right. There's multiple periods in all cultures where different forms and different meanings of music or different points of view from music have been negatively seen or positively seen, and that can be either negatively seen from general culture or negatively seen from aristocracy or the ruling class.
Hip-hop in particular
is especially, and rock music before that,
and jazz before that.
Yeah, the jazz, which was the most wild and crazy and offensive thing when it came out, and now is the let's put on some jazz in the background. No one is bothered by this. No one is upset. Like, there's certain styles of jazz that can be a bit grating on the ears, but for the most part, it's like, yeah, let's just put on some jazz. Let's just put on some Billie Holiday. And that's just good background music, whereas before it used to cause people all this rambunctiousness. But let's talk about reception, which is what I think you were getting at, which is going to places where the musical reception is encouraged and analyzing the music and understanding the music is encouraged and part of just the living, breathing culture. And it's absurd at the idea that someone wouldn't have music as a part of their life, even if just as an audience member, even if just as a listener, and all the way to people who are anxious or afraid to listen to music because they're told that they shouldn't be, and regardless of what they personally believe inside, that's impacting them, and they don't even have a concept of it's like, oh, well, of course I would want to be creative musically, or at least explore if I want to be creative musically because of that. I think that's where you were headed.
I'm taking it a little even more personally than that, which is one of the things that I've run into, and I've talked to some other people who have run into this as well, which is this idea that, not an idea, it's implicit, it's not consciously processed at all, wherein doing music is basically kind of wankery and people don't want to know about it. It's non-productive, it's non-useful, until and unless somehow this magic bit gets set in your attributes and suddenly you're a musician and suddenly it becomes okay for you to do that and people are interested.
I mean, what you're describing almost sounds like just people not wanting to hear bad music or tell people that they love that their music is bad.
No, it's not even bad. No, I'm not even, no. I'm genuinely not talking about that because it's people who have not, or maybe I am talking about that and I don't know it, but I'm talking about people who have never listened to the music, so they have no idea whether it's good or bad. It's not okay for you to even talk about it as doing it because it's just wankery until you get to it.
I think anytime anyone tells their friends or family that they make music when they haven't heard them make music or heard them be really good at making music. I think everyone just assumes that you're awful.
Which is really
I have
a
lots of
good
people that-
idea. I think. I think it's really good to assume that beforehand, because most, like 99% of what everyone makes is terrible.
You are correct, though. I think I get what you're saying. A good example of this is if somebody told me that they didn't want to hang out because they were going to go home and sketch. And I would have a natural instinct, not necessarily acted upon, but an instinct to be like, really? You're not going to do something clearly more important than sketching, or in music's case, work on a beat or work on a song or practice guitar and stuff like that. You're going to choose to do this thing, which you could really just do anytime, because in my mind, and I think Nerdcore is a great example of this, music and art and stuff like that are a hobby until someone is suddenly amazing, and then I'm like, well, of course you do art all the time, that's your thing that you do. And it's a weird transition, and a lot of it is based off of a presumption that if you're not good at it, like if you're not like a B quality person where you're making on a letter grade B quality music, you're wasting your time. Like anyone starts out making really good music or really good art or really good anything from the jump. And
Well, on
so
that point,
I can see
I
that.
think I can elaborate even to point out what a dick I am. Twice a week, Cosplay and I have band practice pretty much twice a week, on Mondays and Wednesdays. And people will ask us if we want to do stuff, and we're like, sorry, man, I got band practice. We can't do it tonight. And everybody pretty much gets it. They're like, okay, yeah, you guys, you put out albums and you do your shows and stuff like that. You obviously need to have band practice. You need to record, you need to write, you need to talk band business. It's obviously important that you guys do your thing. But I have friends who will say, hey, do you guys want to hang out? And they're like, no, we got to write tonight. And in my mind, it's like, yeah, fucking right. Write what? And I'm in a band where I work on music. I am that much of a dick where I'm literally, I am the guy who should understand, who should be like, oh yeah, of course, obviously you got to write, because I got to write. Everybody's got to write. We're all making music, but I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Writing. What are you even writing? And I'm like, what am I even writing? Until I release it, who cares? But I have to fight that asshole bastardy impulse in myself to just be so dismissive of what other people are doing just because they're not like a known quantity. I mean, Cosplay and I were having fruitless, pointless band practice sessions twice a week for a really long time before we ever had a show and put out an album. And that was necessary. It was a necessary part of our development as a band.
Exactly. That kind of dismissal of the whole effort is really counterproductive to the idea of actually doing any art.
Absolutely. Well, and I think this is all a symptom of, I mean, it sounds pompous to say, but a much grander paradigm. The internet has caused so many just complete alterations of human culture and human history. They talk about how all of history goes in these waves sociologically of cultures revering artists and detesting artists, where artists are the scum of the culture or artists are the highest praise. In Shakespeare's time, artists were just looked down upon and they were street rats and the lowest of the low of culture. Whereas just a few hundred years later, they were royal composers in the king's court. And I think that the availability of recorded music via digital recording and the internet combined, as well as broadcast mediums, earlier in the century, has kind of made this permanent divide where both of those social paradigms are coexisting, where there is this huge canyon in between everyone who is an amateur musician who is considered just, oh, you're a rapper, how cute.
How cute.
And everyone who is famous, who's a celebrity, who is like, oh my God, they're culture creators. We should look up to them and revere them. And it's weird until someone, I think, is able to hear and assess your art and deem it to themselves personally to be at least personally valuable, or what they would personally consider to be valuable on a subjective level to someone else. They assume that it's worthless.
What I love about the subject is that it ties into a conversation I've been having a lot lately with, especially with Cloth and Pop. We've talked about this a lot lately, but also with cosplay and with Bill Beats, is that I feel like, not to say it like this, but it works, I guess. I feel like a victim of that sort of semi-musical culture wherein like I grew up being a really strong appreciator of music. My father loves music, and I was raised on classic rock, and my mother loves pop, and I could name all of the artists, and I knew everyone who was in the band. Like, I love music. And other than a brief period of time where all of my friends played instruments in high school and wanted to form a band and we were terrible, I had never really had any musical aspirations for myself until starting Death Star. And even then, it was just in writing hip hop as a lyricist, because that was the thing that I knew I could do. I was a writer. But I'm finding more and more now I'm such a huge appreciator of music, but I know nothing fundamentally about it. And it makes it really difficult for me to even communicate my thoughts on songs that I'm working on. And that's extremely frustrating as an artist, because we will actively be working on production on a track, and I'll be sitting there saying, why does this sound so plinky? It's really muddy. Can we do anything about how fuzzy it is? I'm getting a tinny sound. And I'm like, I'm not even sure if the adjectives I'm using make any sense to anyone who's listening to me. And cosplay has to translate for me like I'm speaking a foreign language, because I know so little about production. And I've actually really wanted to change that, to learn more about not just production, but music in general, because I found it limiting to me as a person to not be able to identify what it is about music that I like. Like, when music does that thing I like, I can't put words to it. I just have to play that part of the song and be like, what he did there.
Exactly. Pointing.
Yeah.
That's what SoundCloud, one of the things that I've been looking for a while is there's no real analog to Goodreads. Do you know what Goodreads is?
Yes.
I'm just checking. For anybody out there listening doesn't know, Goodreads is kind of a social media site for readers, in that you post what books you're reading, you post what you think about them, and you've sat through all of those classes of English, whether you were paying attention or not. And if you're on Goodreads.com, you were paying attention, so you can talk about these things intelligently without having to quote sections and saying, this, I mean here.
Right, exactly.
SoundCloud comes closest in that they actually let you point, because your comments are hidden until the song gets to that play point.
Yeah, and you can say, hey, this is this great thing. What you
exactly, this thing.
But even then, if you don't have the words for it, you can't identify it.
It's the language issue. If none of us had been educated in math, we all experience math. Math is there, just like music is there. Scales are real. When we hear a chord, we know it. If no one had ever explained to us what the process of addition or subtraction or multiplication was, we'd all be sitting here talking about how we need to mix those two values, combine them, because we didn't know what addition was. I think it's the exact same thing.
Yeah,
people
exactly.
figure it out and come up with words, but not everyone is taught that language, and it takes time to learn it and figure it out.
There is a complete lack of a common tongue.
Yeah, well, I think it's there's a lack of dispersion of that common tongue.
Fair enough.
And it's developing dialects because of that lack of dispersion.
Yeah, it's out there. It's out there. It's
like,
all well noted, and like anyone that's really familiar or classically trained in music.
Not it.
And then yeah, I know. I mean, it's the same. Anyone that's really familiar and classically trained in music can just be like, oh, yeah,
great example.
Like, this is a great rest right here. You need a rest right here for a quarter measure. And someone who doesn't know anything about music is like, rest for a quarter? You need to pause it and stop having this thing make noise for this rough amount of time, because I don't even know what BPM you're working with. And then they're like, BPM?
And then in the 60s, bands started calling it a break, or a stop, or a cut. Yeah, and one of my favorite examples of the musical dialects that are coming up, in rap, one of the things that you do is you come back around after you've recorded your verse, and you repeat some of the words as a second layer to kind of beef it up. And they used to call that, before rap was around, they just called it multi-tracking, where you'd record a second track over an existing track. Then with vocals, they specifically called it a background vocal. But with rap, it would be a second man on stage before they ever were recording rap. And they called him the hype man, because he'd make everyone get all hyped up.
Right.
And so they'd call that the hype. Let's hype that verse. Let's do the hype track. And then they started calling it the dupes or the duplicates. And I was just recording at Sketch's house. And this is my favorite. I'm using this from now on. I love it. He developed his own dialect because he's just in his room making awesome music. He doesn't have people telling him what techniques are called. And so he's like, oh, Klopp, that verse was sick. You want to do some roundbacks? I was like, go round back and do it again? Yeah, hell yeah, I'm going to do some roundbacks.
Wow, that is some countrified dialogue right there.
I like it.
Like, yeah, we'll just go 3 C's down the track and do some roundbacks.
Let's do some roundbacks. I love it. I'm using that from now on. It's so great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've always been dubs or hype, but roundbacks I kind of dig.
Yeah, doubles. Yeah, that's another one.
Yeah, we double the vocals, so it's dubs.
That was actually reverse engineered. It was originally on 4-track tape recorders. You would dub it over the top, which was a technical term for what multi-tracking actually, how that was performed on magnetic tape.
Overdubbing.
Yeah, dubbing. And people started using that in hip hop, and everyone just assumed it meant double. And so they say, oh yeah, we're doubling the vocals. That's what dubs is. So it's kind of an assumed etymology that led to a new meaning of the word.
False etymology is a fascinating subject.
It really is.
It's like a retronym only for definitions.
Indeed. Yep. Absolutely. A retronym.
Let's have another podcast based off this, just purely about language.
Oh God,
let's just start a podcast called The Word Nerds.
Yeah, Klopp and I would never shut up. We would just keep talking.
I don't even understand English.
Word nerds.
Like, I just say I have to make up words all the time. I look at 3P. I don't understand like 1 out of every 20 words he says on our songs. I'm like, I don't know what that word means, but it sounds good there, so we're good.
To be fair, no one does.
Yeah,
literally
that's
no
fair.
one,
including
that's
him.
Fair. There's a lot of people out there who are like, yeah, why are you trying to show off with all your like high dialogue and all that? And I'm like, this is legit the way I talk. Like, spend an evening with me.
It's awful. Don't spend an evening with him.
Our DIY segment tonight is kind of written on the fly, but I wanted to do it anyway, because I read an article on music website design a couple of months ago and bounced it off a pretty good web developer I know, and he agrees that they had a couple of really good points, so I wanted to relay those to you guys. First was that your website shouldn't be like a blog. It shouldn't be a big collection of everything and scroll on and on and on and have 15 million gadgets and stuff like that. That isn't to say you shouldn't have a blog, because you should. But your front page, in particular, needs to have a hierarchy of 2 or 3 goals, leading people to do the things you want them most to do, whatever those are. My front page at crimeandtheforcesofevil.com was kind of an assemblage of everything. I had review quotes, I had purchase links, I had a really confusing player bar that no one ever understood. I had a bunch of scattered social media buttons and embeds. I had a story of the band thing that went on just too long. Bluntly, it was a mess that kind of accumulated over time. Every time I thought, ooh, this would be cool, I added it. So that was bad. So I picked 3 top goals. 1, get people to listen to my music, basically to press play. 2, get people to read my blog. This is to encourage connection, sort of form a relationship. And 3, expose people to social media, which it really is the same goal, but it's for people who don't like long-form writing, and they're really kind of different audiences. Most of that junk I had on my front page is totally gone now. There's still a menu bar, because I have multiple pages on my website, and that's required, and everyone understands that. It's not a distraction. The social media candy button stripe that I had almost went away. I almost ditched it. But I let it become part of the banner instead, because that's a place where people who actively look for it will find it, but it's also a place that won't actually distract anyone. Plus, having it in the banner makes it appear on all the pages, which is pretty cool. The primary space on the page is now occupied by 2 music players with big album art and nothing else. That really creates a focus on my primary goal: hit play, play the music. The left bar, which was previously underused, ironically, has become the container for secondary and tertiary goals, not just on the front page, but across the entire site. I already had that going as a design theme. Now I'm really using it. On the front page, It's an excerpt from and link to the latest blog post, and below that, a tweet gadget showing my latest tweets. Then I went through the rest of the site with the same goals in mind. Every page on the site has a primary activity in the right column and a secondary activity in the smaller left column. Further, I made the blog finally look like the rest of the site. I know that seems like something that's really obvious, but I was using a standard theme originally there, and I never really fully integrated it. I know a lot more about CSS and PHP now, so I did. I also made a local videos page, rather than just linking, as I had, to my YouTube channel page, particularly now with YouTube's new channel design, which is completely useless for people like me. I also started linking the podcast page into the site, and it looks like the rest of the pages. This consistency across all the pages makes it feel more like an ecosystem rather than a collection of random websites that aren't really even necessarily the same website but are kind of tied loosely together through links. And it no longer feels like you've been thrown off the site if you go look at a video or play a song. Within the blog itself, I started building collections pages. These are individual post pages, which collect all the links to a whole series of posts that are on an individual topic. For example, the Studio Build-Out series or the Mandolin Travel Case series. These both now have one top-level link which connects these many posts, making what are, frankly, more popular topics easily discoverable. Now, I've had this up for a couple of weeks. Go look at it if you want, crimeandtheforcesofevil.com. It's too early to have really good data, but early indications that I do have off of Google Analytics are really promising. I have more plays via embedded players on the website in the last 2 weeks than I had in the previous 2 months combined. That's really good. Blog hits are up overall, not just from places where I already post links, but in new people finding me both via searches and via anything else as far as I can tell. I'm getting hits back to the site from YouTube proper, and that's new. That didn't happen before. And the people who show up organically are, again, so far, exploring more pages per visit. Whether this will turn into meaningful and long-term improvement, I can't say, but so far it's pretty encouraging. So, you might want to think about this goals hierarchy when making your own websites. It's really tempting to throw everything up front on the front page saying, look at all this cool stuff I have for you. But that turns out just to be overwhelming for most people. It's called choice paralysis, and you don't want your visitors experiencing it because the most common reaction is to go away rather than making a choice. So, figure out your goals, prioritize them, and trim them down to 2 or 3 per page. I'll follow up more on this as more data comes in, because so far it's really too early to make any big conclusions, but so far, like I said, the numbers are really good. Hopefully, they'll stay that way. And that's it for podcast episode number 3. We hope you've enjoyed it. July is a really big month for us, a really busy month. We may and may not be here, but we'll be back in August if not. Please send feedback, commentary, criticism, news items, and anything else to crime@crimeandtheforcesofevil.com. We do want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. From Supervillain Studios, this is the NWC Radiophonic Workshop.
Unlimited awkward handies.